soldiers would smuggle bottles of booze into the camp by putting it into their boots,
I think you
bootlegging.
did that in high school too, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that what
yeah,
we
right.
did?
Welcome to the Exploring Washington State podcast. Here's your host, Scott Cowan.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. This episode is our 222nd episode, and the guest today is Brad Holden. Brad is a Seattle area author who has 3 books out that all cover the Seattle area during the Prohibition time of our history. And they're fascinating stories. Brad's a great storyteller. I think you're really going to enjoy listening to Brad as he tells tales about Prohibition in the greater Seattle area. Brad's also a podcast host. He has a podcast about dive bars and other drinking establishments in the Seattle area called Dim Lights and Stiff Drinks. Really enjoyable podcast. You should check it out as well. But before we get started, just got a favor to ask you. If you could, share the podcast with somebody else who might enjoy listening to it. And if you'd be so kind as to leave us a review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on, we'd really appreciate that because it means a lot to get feedback on what we're doing right, what we're not doing right. And we're always looking to improve. So without further ado, we're going to jump into the episode with Brad Holden. Well, welcome back to this episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast. This is going to be episode 222, and my guest today is Brad Holden. Brad, I'm going to read something off your bio to kind of introduce you because it sums it up better than I probably can. And so whoever wrote this for you, well, you're an author, so I guess maybe you wrote it. All right. Your bio says author, historian, finder of old things. I love that. I just think that's very cool. So welcome. Why don't you expand on finder of old things, historian, and author? How'd you get started?
It started with the finder of old things part. That's where it all started. So when I was a kid, my stepdad collected and restored old cars. And so as a result, we were always going to flea markets, swap meets, and stuff like that, looking for old car parts. And so I'd always tag along, and they'd throw me a few dollars, and then I'd go see what I could buy with that. And so I was looking through old toys and comic books and stuff like that, and I always enjoyed that. So it's something that always stuck with me on and off throughout my life. And probably about 10, 12 years ago or so, I got the bug again, the picker bug. And this time I was going out, and what I really enjoyed finding was old artifacts and interesting items from Seattle's past. Because I liked finding stuff like this is cool, what is this, and then bringing it home and researching the story behind it. And a lot of times you'd find some really cool story that had never been told before by researching these artifacts that I was finding. At some point, my then high school age daughter, Instagram had just kind of become a thing. And she was like, you should start an Instagram account with this stuff because I think people would really like it. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah. So she helped me start an Instagram account where I started showing pictures of the stuff that I was finding and kind of the story behind it and stuff. And at first I was like, maybe 30 people become interested in it. That'll be great. That'll be a success. But right away, it pretty much blew up pretty fast. And people really enjoyed kind of going along and seeing what I was going to find next and what was going to turn up. So it became really popular. So I was doing that for a few years. And then somewhere along the way, I was at an estate sale and I found this old moonshine still down in the basement of this house. And I knew what it was right away because I've always kind of been into Prohibition history. And so I was like, well, this is really cool. What else is down here? If this is down here, what else can I find? So I started looking around and I found this box of documents, including these papers that basically told the story of the moonshine still, which was this guy was using it to make hooch for the local neighborhood. He eventually got caught by the feds and sent to prison. but it was a really cool story, and it just kind of piqued my curiosity. And I was thinking, okay, well, I realized that the local story of Prohibition has never really been told before, because when you hear about Prohibition, you always hear about cities like St. Louis and Chicago and New York, and you know about those stories, but you don't really hear so much about Seattle or the Pacific Northwest. So that kind of led me down this rabbit hole of research, which eventually led to my first book, Seattle Prohibition, Bootleggers, Rumrunners, and Graft in the Queen City.
Yeah, I'm halfway through that one.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
How are you
bought
enjoying
all
it
three.
so far?
I'll compliment you when we get done, because there's some compliments from you about your writing style.
Okay,
I enjoy
cool.
it greatly. How's that?
Okay, cool, cool.
Well, let me ask you. So,
go ahead.
Are you from Seattle originally?
I was born in Seattle, but I grew up primarily in Spokane.
Okay. And when did you move back to the Seattle area?
When I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
That's when my dad got another job and we moved back here. And I graduated from Gig Harbor High School.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I grew up in Tacoma as well. Well, I grew up in Tacoma. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
What year did you graduate?
80.
80. Okay. I graduated 87. So.
Yeah. So, yeah. So you went, okay. So so after high school, let's derail you here a little bit. So what'd you do after high school?
So after high school, I actually joined the Air Force, and I was in the Air Force for 4 years. I just wanted to get a college education, use the GI Bill and stuff. So that's what I did, and I went around the world. And then when I got out in '92, I moved back to Seattle immediately. I knew that's where I wanted to move back, because when I went into the Air Force in '88, that's when like a lot of the Seattle music, the so-called grunge bands were coming out, and I was seeing them before I went in the Air Force at all these underground clubs, and I was really into them, and I just knew that that's what I wanted to come back to. I wanted to do my time in the military, but then when I got out, I wanted to come back to this magical place, and so that's what I did. And I went to the UW, and I got a degree in anthropology of all things.
Okay.
And I've been back in Seattle ever since.
All right. So out of unpacking all of that, 2 questions for you. When you were in the military, were you stationed abroad? Did you go any place interesting, or were you just, stuck on a military base in Georgia or wherever?
No, actually I was stationed over in Turkey, and it was fantastic.
Okay.
And this was pre any of the Gulf Wars, so it was very safe to travel over there. You could pretty much go wherever you wanted on your off duty hours, and it was fantastic. I had a really great time over there. Yeah.
All right. Now here's the hard question. You were seeing these bands before they became the bands.
Yeah.
Who was your favorite band back then? Who was the band that you enjoyed seeing? Like when you got to go see them, you're like, hey, this group's really cool.
Soundgarden. Yeah. I remember seeing them when they first came out, before they had even an LP or an album or anything. And I knew nothing about them, but when I saw them, they just blew my mind. I was like, this is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I saw them. I think it was the Blue Moon Tavern.
Oh, did you really? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of my old college roommate was playing in a lot of those bands of that era.
Okay.
Did not hit, that commercial success. During that era, he hit commercial success with a hip hop song in 2013. So,
which hip hop song, just out of curiosity?
Thrift Shop.
Oh, okay. So you don't know more.
Yeah. My roommate, the college roommate, is Michael Wansley, or Wands, the guy that sang the hook on Thrift Shop. If you saw the video, the guy in the pink suit, the orange suit. Yeah. That's my old college roommate. And, so
I saw him live on that tour, and I think they brought that guy out that you were just talking about.
Yeah. Did you see him at, WAMU Theater?
Yeah.
Yeah. That we went to that too. And, so it was really interesting to me about that particular show. First off, it was really cool to see there's more to the story. But, to see your buddy who you've known for, let's just say at that time was 30 plus years.
Yeah.
Hit the pinnacle of this, and watching him like on Saturday Night Live and all that was just surreal. But we're standing there at the WAMU Theater, and we're in the bar, and there's nobody in the bar. It's like the exact opposite because everyone was under 21, so we just stood in the bar. It was kind of fun. So yeah. Anyway, I've known Mike for 40 years now.
That's very cool.
I've watched him play in dozens of bands, of a wide genre of music, and he was always my conduit to meeting interesting people in the music business in Seattle.
I bet. That's really neat.
You like Soundgarden. Okay. So we're like, all right. So then I normally ask this question of musicians, but I'll ask it of you. And I'm going to ask you to answer this back in that era. Okay. So not today. We'll go to that one part 2, but back in the era, where was the venue you like to see music played at? What did you like back in the day?
Well, you might even remember it. It was in Tacoma. I mentioned that I was living in Gig Harbor. Yeah. And so the closest, big city was Tacoma, and there was a place called the World Community Theater. You familiar with that?
On 56, right off of 56th Street.
I believe so. Yeah.
Right off of 56 and
yeah, it was an old
56 and M.
That sounds right.
The reason I know that is because my great aunt and uncle owned that.
Oh, no kidding.
Back in the 30s, and back when it was a movie theater. Yeah,
exactly. It was a movie theater. Okay. Yeah. They converted it into a punk club sometime in the 80s.
Okay.
And I saw so many shows there, and it was just kind of a magical place, because basically you'd go there, and the guy that owned it would be up front at the ticket counter collecting money. But other than that, there was no authority beyond that. There's no bouncers or security or anything like that. So anything could happen, and it often did.
Do you go, I mean, with the pandemic, this question's a little harder, but do you still go see live music nowadays?
Not nearly as much.
Okay.
Not nearly as much. Yeah. I've gotten kind of lame. Like, my only knowledge of current music is through my 21-year-old daughter.
Okay.
She kind of keeps me abreast of like what's popular. So, through her, I've been introduced to artists like Billie Eilish and Lana Del Rey and groups like that I probably wouldn't even be aware of otherwise. But no, I don't go see live music nearly as much as I probably should.
Yeah, I living in Wenatchee, we don't get to see live music as much unless we come over to your side. I still love to go see live music as often as I can, though. All right, so we derailed you. So
that's okay.
So after college, your daughter kind of, introduces you to Instagram, which is funny because my daughter doesn't let me get on our Instagram account because, I'll just ruin it.
You don't want to embarrass her. Yeah.
Well, she's like, no, Dad, you don't know what you're doing. Just stay away.
Right.
For the Explore Washington State, I'm not allowed. It's pretty fun. Had you ever had any interest in being an author?
Yes. Yeah. I always wanted to be a writer, pretty much since high school.
All right.
I was never an athlete. I tried my hand at being a musician. I was a drummer for a while, but I wasn't really good. But the one thing I always was pretty good at was writing. And those were always kind of the people that I idolized were different writers, depending on what phase I was in life.
So like, give me some examples. Who back in the day, who were you kind of like, who'd you like?
Well, it depends. So, probably my, late teens, early 20s, it was, of course, the different beat writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg and stuff like that. I went through that phase like a lot of people do. Charles Bukowski.
Been there, got that t-shirt too. Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And then as I've gotten older, it's been more into just different historical writers like Eric Larson, John Krakauer, and stuff like that. But I still enjoy the classics. I still look up to people like Hemingway and people like that. So, yeah.
All right. So when you decided to, or, when you executed on becoming a writer, your bio also talks about Seattle Magazine and historylink.org and other things like that. Where did you first start getting your work published? Did you start on a magazine or online, or so what?
Yeah, it's just all happened kind of organically. It's fun. It's kind of like how the Instagram account led to me discovering this moonshine still, which led me to eventually writing my first book. And after my first book was published, then that opened even more doors. Through some mutual acquaintances, I met the team at History Link
Mm-hmm.
and pitched some ideas to them, and they really liked some of my ideas. So I started writing for them, and I've been writing for them ever since, and it's been wonderful. And then as far as Seattle Magazine, the editor of Seattle Magazine did a profile on me a couple years back, and we just kind of stayed in touch. And they recently relaunched the magazine earlier this year, kind of a new
Mm-hmm.
format with a whole new staff of writers and everything. And he asked me if I'd be willing to come on and write a column for him. So I was like, sure, that sounds great. So yeah, it's just all these opportunities have just kind of opened up unexpectedly. It's been really fun.
So your first book, which is the one I'm only halfway through. So
Okay.
I read the Alfred M. Hubbard book first, which I know we're going to get to, but that was, what a story.
Yeah.
As an unpublished author, how hard was it to pitch a historical book to a publisher?
Yeah, it was, I knew a guy that wrote for this publisher called Arcadia, and they publish different historical books. They're the ones that published all three of my books so far.
Okay.
And he had written this book called The Brewing History of Seattle.
All right.
And he kind of encouraged me to pitch my idea to him. So I did. And it was somewhat of an intimidating process because you fill out this proposal form, and it's a pretty big form where you kind of sketch out your ideas and what you want to do and how you're going to promote it and all this different stuff. And then the acquisitions editor brings it before a board, and they basically vote on it. She stands up and, okay, Brad Holden wants to write this book for us, and here's what he wants to do. And they vote on it. And luckily for me, they gave me the green light, and it went through. So it was intimidating, but it went pretty easy overall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Being an author, writing a book is maybe one of the easiest things you can do in the world. Did you notice my tongue planted firmly in my cheek there? What was it like for you do you enjoy the research part, right? You enjoy gathering the tidbits and the stories and crafting them into a cohesive.
Yeah. The research part is probably maybe the funnest part.
Okay.
Of the process.
But let's talk about your first book, that process. What was there something about it that you were surprised how challenging it was that you didn't think about?
Probably the deadline is the most challenging part. So, they give you a deadline, and once I got the green light and I signed all the paperwork and it was on, then it dawned on me like, okay, I have, I think I had 15 months at that point to finish my research and start writing. So I just hit the starting line and just went for it. But it's nerve-wracking because, you're up against this deadline and you want it to be as great as possible. You're going to put out this first work out into the world, and you want it to be well received, and you don't want to make any big blunders or mistakes. So just trying to go up against the deadline, but to keep that good quality that that you want was definitely challenging.
Did you meet the deadline?
I did.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay. You didn't have to ask for an extension.
No.
Awesome.
No.
All right.
No, I've met all my deadlines. I can say that. I can kind of boast about that.
That's very cool. So then so you hand the manuscript over to the team there, they edit it, they give it back to you, making some suggestions and some, fixes and all that. Mm-hmm. How long from when you turned the manuscript in the first time to when you saw the first probably printed proof, how long of a period was that?
Oh, that's a good question. It was probably about close to 8 months. Yeah.
Okay. So at that time, you've been working on this project for almost 2 years, 23, 15
Correct.
months to,
Yeah.
So it's a really, in today's day and age, where after 5 seconds we've thumbed up or thumbed down something and moved on to
Right.
32 other little photographs. A couple year process is unusual to me.
Yeah.
I think it's cool, but it's unusual. How was the editing piece once you handed it over? Because this is the reason I'm asking you these questions is I have my preconceived notions of how I would feel, and mine is, well, this is my baby, and I really want you to be kind to it. Please don't like hack and slash it.
Yeah.
But how was the editing process for you? Was it fairly painless?
Yeah, actually, it wasn't too bad. Arcadia, the thing, one great positive thing I'll say about Arcadia is that they don't, at least for me, they've never gone in and said, no, we don't like this chapter and let's get rid of this. Mm-hmm. Their editing, any of the editing changes was just, if they found some grammatical errors or some typos or anything like that, what stuff you want them to find.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You want them to find that and correct that kind of stuff. So that's basically all I had to deal with. But other than that, they didn't do any significant changes to my manuscript, which was great. That
would be my fear. So after a couple of years, the book goes to the public, right? Mm-hmm. This is a sad fact. This percentage of people that don't read a book after high school, some staggering number. It's astronomically large, and it's so sad to me.
Yeah.
So you're participating in something that doesn't have mass appeal anymore. You just turn it into a Netflix series, and people will devour it.
Right.
I actually think that the Hubbard book would make a great.
Thank you. Yeah. I've heard that a lot, actually. Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating. Anyway, how was the book received? What was it like to be, you're a published author? That's gotta be a cool feeling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where was the first bookstore you saw it on the shelf in?
Bartell's Drugs actually was the first place I actually saw it on the bookshelf, because there's one kind of close to my house. Yeah, okay. I just happened to pop in one day right after it got published, and there it was. They had one of those rotating book displays, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool. That's my book." And it was quite a feeling. It was a thrill.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's very cool, because I wouldn't have expected you to say, I was going to expect you to say something like, "Oh, I saw it down at Elliott Bay," or maybe at Third Place, but not I would not have guessed Bartell.
That was the first place. Yeah. Yeah. It was cool.
Right. So I'm going to guess that you got bit by the bug, because you've done 2 more books since then. Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling if I asked you, and I will ask you, you've got plans for anything else coming? I mean, do you want to keep writing?
I definitely want to keep writing. I'm taking a little break right now from book writing, just because I pumped out 3 books in the course of, like close to 5 years. And so that was, and I look at those 3 books as kind of my Seattle Prohibition trilogy, because they all have to do with different parts of Seattle during the Prohibition era. So now that I'm done with that trilogy, I'm kind of taking a break, and I'm just going to work on my freelancing, my column I write for Seattle Magazine and History Link and things like that. But I do have plans for future books. I'm in talks with a local publisher about a couple ideas that I'm exploring. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I haven't seen anything. I don't look at Seattle Magazine, not because I just haven't seen it. What's your column in Seattle Magazine?
It's called Seattle Artifacts. So it's an extension of what I was doing on Instagram. And I've been doing it less and less over the past few years, because I've been doing more writing and less finding of old things. Mm-hmm. So it's been cool for that reason, because it's kind of resurrected that original idea I had. So basically, the gist of my column is each issue I look at a different artifact and kind of go into the story behind it.
Oh, very cool.
And at the beginning of for one coming up, the next issue that's coming out in a couple months is about the Derelict League. We were talking about them earlier. About this crazy baseball league that existed in Seattle during the 1970s. So I'm having a lot of fun.
I've never heard of that league before until. So the other thing we haven't unraveled or disclosed yet is that you also have a podcast. So I was listening to an episode on your podcast, and you guys mentioned that. I've never heard of that before. So without giving away too much of your article, would you just share a little bit of how that league was operating?
Yeah. So in the early 70s, I think it was 1971, Seattle had a pretty sizable hippie community living here, as you could imagine. And a group of Seattle hippies were just kind of sitting around like, we should start a baseball league. Yeah. And they just started brainstorming, and they came up with this derelict league. And it followed the traditional rules of baseball, but they added their own unique rules to it. For instance, they didn't have an umpire out on the field. If there was some kind of dispute, they would just do a coin toss and settle it that way.
Okay.
So they had these unique rules. They also had, there were 3 pitches. There were no strikes. There were no balls. The pitcher would throw three pitches, and that was it. That was
so. What happened if you're the pitcher, I'm the batter, you throw me three pitches, I don't make contact, I'm out?
Yeah, you were out according to their team. And the most important rule was they had a keg of beer at every game. In the dugout, there was a keg of beer. And that was probably their top rule. So that kind of gives you an idea of the flavor of this derelict league. They lasted for nearly a decade, and
that's crazy.
They became really popular. They had all kinds of teams with all kinds of colorful names: the Crabs, the Losers. A number of taverns had their own teams. One of them was the Fremont Tavern Muff Divers. Really colorful names. There was even a cult here called the Love Israel cult. Have you ever heard of them?
I have not.
Okay. Yeah, they were this crazy cult, hippie cult that existed in Seattle in the 1970s. And they even started their own team as part of the Derelict League. So it was quite the story. It was a fun one to research.
So when's that what month is that going to be published?
That's going to be in the November/December issue of Seattle Magazine. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to have to find a copy of that. That sounds very cool.
Yeah.
Well, but okay, so not that you're the rules master here, but it seems to me, was there any why would you throw 3 pitches that were good to hit? Why didn't you just, throw them? I mean, if I'm out after three balls are thrown at me, why give me anything? Why?
Yeah, I don't know. And I don't know how they disputed, like, if it was a ball or strike, because that's kind of the whole nuance of baseball is balls and strikes. And that's kind of what makes it. But I don't know, for whatever reason, they did away with that rule, and just the pitcher would throw, 3 throws, and then that was it, on to the next one.
Where were these games held?
They went through the Seattle Parks Department, and so they would just play them at different play fields and throughout the city.
So think about this. Think about what you just said. In the 1970s, you went through the Seattle Parks Department to arrange to have baseball games at a park. And we had kegs of beer in the dugouts. Nowadays, you wouldn't be able to do that.
No, different time back then.
Very different time. Wow. All right.
Yeah. And I have a feeling different illicit substances were probably enjoyed during the course of these games too.
Most likely,
during the 1970s. Yeah.
1970s, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, let's go back. I derailed you about your book. So your first book out was the Seattle Prohibition book.
Correct, right? Yeah.
And in that book, which I'm only halfway through, so I can't speak too articulately about it, but in that book, you introduced, at least in the first half, just briefly, this Alfred Hubbard guy.
Mm-hmm.
So help me out. I feel like I'm cheating on a test. Is he part of the back half of the book? Do you remember?
Yeah, he plays a pretty prominent role in that whole story. I didn't profile him as much in the Seattle Prohibition book as maybe I should have, just because I had such, you have only a certain amount of words that you're limited to. So you have to really kind of narrow down what you're going to cover. I probably could have doubled the amount of how much I wrote.
You wrote a book about him. I mean, there was obviously
I ended up writing a book about him. Yeah.
So when you were preparing the Seattle Prohibition book, and you did you hear about Hubbard before? I mean, when did you?
No, it
Okay,
was during the research of the Seattle Prohibition book. I'd never heard of him before. So when I set out to write the Seattle Prohibition book, I had a list of names of people that I knew I wanted to cover. Like Roy Olmsted, for instance, was an obvious choice. You know, the
right.
area's top bootlegger. Johnny Schnarr, the top rum runner of the area. People like that. But Al Hubbard was not on my radar at all. Once I started getting deep into the research, though, his name started popping up in these really unusual ways. And at some point, I realized, like, okay, who's this Al Hubbard guy? I'd never heard of him before, but obviously, you know, he's a big part of the story. So I kind of set everything aside, and I think I Googled his name, and these very interesting results popped up, and I went straight down the Al Hubbard rabbit hole pretty quickly. And by the time I was done with my Prohibition book, I knew, like, okay, I know what my next book's going to be.
So you did. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Prohibition book, the way, and once again, I'm only referencing the first half of the book, but the way you were describing Seattle in the 1910 to 15 range,
Mm-hmm.
I don't claim to know that much about history, but I really do like history, but you were sharing things that I was just like, I had no clue about.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that kind of stood out to me was that the Bootleggers and the Rumrunners, and I'm going to ask you to define both of those when you give your answer to the audience, seem to be fairly well, they weren't shooting each other.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be collaborative, if you will, cooperative, versus when
Correct.
you think of, like, when you hear about things in, like, say, Chicago or New York,
yeah,
they weren't.
Right.
Do you have any opinion of why that might have been that way? But yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, the culture here during Prohibition, you're right, was a lot different than a lot of the other cities, like over on the East Coast, where they're having shootouts and massacres and turf wars and stuff. Here, I'm not really sure what that is, if it's kind of the laid-back Scandinavian vibe the city's always had, or what. I'm not sure, but for whatever reason, we just didn't have that. You know, Roy Olmsted was called the gentleman bootlegger because he didn't allow his men to engage in violence. He didn't let them carry guns because he didn't want that unwanted attention. He'd rather just pay somebody off than, you know, shoot them and draw a bunch of heat to himself. So they called him the gentleman bootlegger, but that's kind of the vibe of what was going on here in Seattle during the time. They even had a bootleggers convention where all the area bootleggers met, and they used Robert's Rules of Order to democratically decide on a set of rules, you know, such as prices and all that kind of stuff for the local bootlegging racket. So it was a lot different than the rest of the country in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the audience, that, because you're using, the book uses two terms that I guess when I thought of Rum Runner, I was thinking more of the Caribbean, not that. So what's the definition of Rum Runner?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I get that a lot. So the difference between bootlegging and rum running is bootlegging is smuggling alcohol on land. Rum running is doing it on water. Bootlegging came from this term from the Civil War, where soldiers would smuggle bottles of booze into the camp by putting it into their boots. Bootlegging.
I think you did that in high school too, right?
Yeah, I'm sure we did that at a few concerts.
Yeah,
and
that's I grew up in high school in the 70s where bell bottoms were popular. So I mean, you wasn't like you're trying to stick a pint down your boots and wearing Levi's. So okay,
right. Yeah, so that tradition carried on. And then, and rum running was doing it on the water. And here in Puget Sound, booze was still legal up in Canada. So local bootleggers would hire local rum runners to get on their ships and go up to Canada. Usually Victoria or Vancouver were the top two destinations. And the Canadian liquor businesses quickly realized what a profitable setup this was for them. So they even had basically these booze stores set up on the wharves, and they would just wait for the American customers to come in, load up their boats, take their money, and then send them on their way.
Wow.
And then anyway, the Rumrunners would then smuggle the booze back to different places throughout the region, Bellingham, Edmonds, Seattle, Everett, down to Tacoma. And then once it hit land, the booze would then be loaded onto waiting trucks. And then from there, they would usually take it to like a horse stable or a garage, and it would be in these wooden crates, and they would just store it there until they were able to sell it throughout the city. Yeah.
So that's just, I mean, you think about that, you know, you're out on Puget Sound in a boat, and these weren't particularly large boats, right? These were designed to be pretty fast.
Fast, yeah. Fast, and then with a pretty decent sized cargo hold.
Right. Yeah. So that's, we're about at the point where I've stopped reading that book. So I'm going to, for the sake of this,
you don't want any spoilers,
right? And I'm just going to encourage everybody that you need to go check out the book based on that's my half book review for you. Go check it out. So Seattle Mystic Alfred M. Hubbard. So this guy pops up in the Prohibition book as he ends up living in Olmsted's basement. And he was involved in Prohibition on both sides, both he was almost like a double agent. You know, he was working for the feds and he was working for the bootleggers. But then he had some engine. What I didn't realize, and either I overlooked it in the Hubbard book or you didn't bring it up, when he demoed his boat. Yeah. He was only 24.
Oh, he was younger than that. He was only, I think he had just turned 19.
Yeah. See, that's just crazy to me. So yeah, he had this boat that seems very, almost like something out of National Enquirer, like not really believable. Like it's almost like a clickbaity headline. Right. But so he had this boat that was Earth's magnetism powered, if you will, right? Am I saying that? And
yeah, it was the atmospheric power generator. It was this engine that he claimed extracted energy from the atmosphere and then could be used into convertible energy to power, boats or cars or planes.
Yeah. So, wouldn't that be cool if that really was the case today? So, but not only that though, so he did that, but he was also an electronics whiz. So did he start? No, help me out here because memory is a little fuzzy. I read the book earlier this week, so it's really not good that I say this, is it? But radio, he was one of the early pioneers of Seattle radio.
Yeah, so him and Roy Olmsted built one of Seattle's first radio stations that Roy Olmsted operated from his house. I think the original reason Olmsted built this is because he kind of saw the tea leaves that the feds were coming after him and had a target on his back. And he wanted to come up with a business that he could fall back on outside of bootlegging that wouldn't land him in prison. So I think that's why he built the radio station. According to local legend, though, they were, so his wife, Elise, was also part of this whole radio venture. And in fact, she had her own program on this radio station of theirs in which she would read nursery rhymes to kids at night.
Yeah.
It was called the Aunt Vivian Radio Hour or something like that. And the legend holds that she would insert coded messages into her nursery rhymes that would help the Rumrunners and the bootleggers out there avoid being arrested by the cops.
That's cool. That's a cool story.
It is a cool story. But anyway, so yeah, they built this radio station. Roy Olmsted eventually sold it when his legal trouble started mounting, as a way to generate some cash. And then it went through a series of owners, and it continues to operate today as Como Radio, Como TV and radio.
That's amazing, isn't it? All right. So, but Hubbard has this. So to me, he's got this first chapter, where he was this inventor, this atmospheric engine. Then he gets into bootlegging and radio. That's chapter 2. But then he's got this, like the second half of his life, if you will. Yeah. He became and why? Okay. I've read dozens of books about the Grateful Dead. I love listening to Grateful Dead music. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite bands ever to go see live. It was a magical experience.
I saw them a couple times.
Yeah. So
Yep.
Where'd you see him at?
I saw him down in Eugene, Oregon.
When Little Feet opened for him?
No, it was the
Okay.
it was the Indigo Girls.
Remember them? Wow. Okay. I didn't go to that one. So I've read, kind of this whole counterculture thing. I've read a lot of books, and so you hear references to Kesey and to Timothy Leary and all this. And Hubbard's name should have popped up in those too. Right. And I never heard of this guy.
Yeah, he's remained very obscure, and that's kind of what I was hoping to do with my book, is kind of break him more out in the open, because he's so obscure. Barely anybody's heard of him. Yeah. If you ask the average person, even the average, Grateful Dead fan and stuff, about Al Hubbard, and a lot of people don't.
No. And so I'm reading this, and I'm one of the thoughts that was running through my brain the entire time I'm reading this book about him is that, how have I never heard this guy's story? It's and this is the compliment about your writing. It's a historical book, but it reads like a novel. Right. I mean, it reads, there's this great story going on, and you have a really accessible way of presenting it.
Thank you.
People think history's boring. Memorizing facts, and it's not though. But this Hubbard story, I mean, it's almost like I'm kidding you. It's like, are you sure you didn't make all this up? Because I mean, it's fascinating. It's it seems impossible that this one person
had so many chapters, crazy chapters. Yeah, crazy inventor, bootlegger, all this different stuff.
Dual agent, if you will, and then and then radio, and then he finds LSD.
Yeah.
So when you were doing the research for this, were you just constantly scratching your head going, what else am I going to find?
Oh, always. I mean, when you go, his story was probably the craziest rabbit hole I've ever gone down before. And I don't even know if I went all the way fully down it, because I don't know if that's possible with someone like Hubbard. And there was, even after writing the book, I went as deep as I could in my research, and there's still unanswered questions that I'm really not quite 100% sure,
right?
The answers to. So,
I loved reading that book. That was a very,
thank you.
It was a very pleasant surprise, frankly. It was very cool. And then, we're doing this backwards, because normally when an author's talking, they talk about their latest book, but now let's talk about your latest book. And that's the Lost Roadhouses of Seattle that you co-authored with it's Blecha, right? I asked you before.
Yep.
Yeah. Peter Blecha.
Yep.
And when I listened to a video with you guys sitting at the shanty, and you got, and I hadn't listened to all of it. But one thing I took away from that I thought was very interesting is that you guys collaborated on this, but you were interested in I-90 or Highway 99, not I-90, Highway 99, and he was off on the Bothell Highway side of the county, if you will.
Correct.
And I haven't read that book.
Okay.
I just picked it up. Well, I was trying to buy it, and your Amazon profile does not have that book listed.
Oh, really?
In Kindle.
Oh, I think Kindle just came out like maybe a few days ago.
Okay. And I looked Pete up, and it was Kindle on his profile. So I just purchased it.
Okay.
And so another sale for you. Walk me through, because so you talk about the shanty, which is a place I've been to. I don't know what else is in there because I haven't read it yet. So what sort of research did you guys do, and what was it like to collaborate with an author versus doing it all yourself?
Yeah, it actually went really good. And, collaborating with someone can be tricky business, because as you can imagine, if you have two different writers co-writing something, then you've got two different people, each with their own vision and writing style and things like that. So there's a high chance of there being some conflict along the way. With Pete and I, though, it went very smooth. And I think
Did you just flip a coin?
Well, I had always, it actually worked out really good because for a couple different reasons. One of them was that I had always been interested in the roadhouses on Highway 99 because I live not too far from Highway 99. I live up in Edmonds in this little place called Esperance, which butts up against Highway 99. I've lived there for over 25 years. And just as someone who's into kind of local, interesting, colorful history, I knew about roadhouses for a while. So I've always been curious about them and kind of low-key researching them in different capacities throughout the years. Pete, likewise, lives not too far from what used to be the old Bothell Highway, what is now Bothell Way or Lake City Way. So that's always been kind of his interest, is the roadhouses that exist along there. So when he and I met for the first time and realized that we each had a mutual interest in these roadhouses, we discovered like that I was more into the Highway 99 ones and he was into the Bothell ones. So when we decided to collaborate on this book, it went pretty easy. We're just like, okay, well, I'll cover the 99 one, the Highway 99 ones, and you cover the Bothell ones, and that's how we did it. So it was a pretty smooth operation. Cool. And the other thing I'll say is that, so Pete, the other thing that's really cool about this book is that Pete is probably the top historian when it comes to local Pacific Northwest music history. He used to write for The Rocket back in the 80s and into the 90s. He had a column about local music history. He's wrote a number of books about it. So when it comes to local music history, he's the top guy. And he was able to bring that element to the writing of the Roadhouse book that we worked on together, because music was a big part of these places.
Right.
And then for me, my area of expertise is local Prohibition. And of course, these roadhouses were a direct result of what was going on during Prohibition. So I was able to bring that layer to it. So between the two of us, we came up with this really cool, rich history of these roadhouses. And the end result we were both really happy with as a result of that. Okay. Yeah.
Is Parker's in that?
Yeah,
book?
It is. Yeah, we definitely cover Parker's.
Did you ever go to Parker's?
I did. Yeah, back in the day. I think I saw a couple heavy metal shows there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Parker's back in the day. Parker's.
Yeah.
The Shanty.
In
there. Yeah, it's fascinating. So this is an I liked how you tied it all together and called it your Prohibition trilogy, because I think that's I like the way you kind of tied that all together. For me, that makes it easy.
Yeah.
Now that book just came out. You were just released a month ago?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And have you seen it on a bookstore shelf?
I have. Yeah. A few different bookstores. Yeah. I've popped into a few different bookstores to sign books. My local bookstore, Edmonds Bookshop, which was one of my favorites just because it's my community bookstore. They have stuff for sale. Third Place Books, Elliott Bay.
So is it still a rush to see your baby out on the shelf?
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It's still very cool.
That's cool. Are you guys doing a lot of book promotion for it?
Yeah, we did. When your book comes out, usually the first 3 months is kind of the sweet spot because there's a lot of excitement over the fact that this book was just released. And so you try to, as an author, you try to seize upon that. So we've been doing a lot of different interviews with local papers and stuff. I was just on this spot on Como News called Eric's Heroes, and which he profiled the Shanty, and he interviewed me for it. So yeah, we've been doing quite a bit.
Well, I'm reading, here in, Cairo, Seattle Refined, NPR, King 5 Evening. You've hit all the hot spots, if you will, of media. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The other thing though is, besides being an author and holding down a day job, because this is your, we'll call it your side hustle, because that's the current buzzword. It's your side hustle.
There you go.
But on the other side hustle is Dim Lights and Stiff Drinks, the dive bars of Seattle. And you got some co-hosts there. So how did you guys come up with the idea to do a podcast? Because now that, this is, like I said, this is my 222nd episode.
Yeah.
I had no idea when I started this that I would do it this much, and I enjoy it. So what's your journey been with podcasting?
Yeah. So, It's with a couple friends of mine that I've known since the 90s. We've been longtime friends, and I think we were just sitting around one day, probably at some bar, like, what should we do for a pod? We should do a podcast. What could we do? And we were just kind of brainstorming different ideas. And one of us came up with like, oh, we should do like a dive bar podcast. That's kind of interesting. So we just kind of took that idea and went off running with it. And so what we do for the podcast is we visit a different local dive bar or historical drinking establishment. It's been around for a long time. We visit the place and we record our podcast live at that location, wherever we're visiting. And then we go over the history of it. So it's another opportunity for me to explore local history in kind of a unique and interesting way by going over the history of these places. And it's been a lot of fun. Yeah, we've really enjoyed it.
Putting you on the spot, if you were to so we're recording this on a Saturday.
Okay.
So Saturday afternoon, you're going to go down to one of the past dive bars that you've recorded episodes in. Where are you going to go and have a beer, and what beer would you have?
That's a great question. Well, if I was going to hit a dive bar tonight, I would probably hit Daryl's Tavern on Aurora Avenue. It's, I guess it would be in the Shoreline area. It's been around for a long time. I love that place. That's one of my favorites. And as far as what beer I would have, gosh, it depends what they have on tap. I would probably either have a hazy IPA or a Rainier Tallboy. Because sometimes, depending where you're at, a Rainier Tallboy is just what the doctor ordered for a good dive bar. It just fits it.
I can't argue that your prescription is accurate, but
you're not a fan of the Rainier.
The only person. I'm not a fan of the Rainier.
That's okay. Yeah. Well, it's one of those old lagers. It's like Budweiser or Miller. It's like
but like
grandpa's beer.
Yeah, well, so the first beer I ever had a sip of was with my dad at a friend's house, and it was an ice cold Olympia, and that still strikes me as maybe the most magical taste I ever had in my life. But Rainier's one I just never.
That's okay.
I know people complain. I'll get hate mail over the fact that I'm disrespecting Rainier.
Yeah.
Super iconic brand in the Seattle area. I love their advertising. Their advertising in the 70s was absolutely
always the best.
Yes, absolutely.
They're making a documentary about that right now.
Are they?
Yeah. I forget who it is, but they just came across this. They have this whole trove of old Rainier beer commercials, all those classic ones. And so they're doing a documentary on it. I can't wait till it comes out.
Would you please ping me and tell me when that's out so I can go? If I don't, I'll do the same if I hear. But that sounds magical.
Yeah.
So you guys, Dim License Stiff Drinks, great title. And the episode I listened to was about Slim's, which is not an old bar. So it's a new entrant into the dive bar culture of Seattle, if you will. Mm-hmm. But I loved how you guys were kind of describing how they put it. I'm not doing it justice, but basically look around and when did this bar open? And was it 2008 it opened?
That sounds right. Yeah, I think so. Something close
so we're going to say 2008, close enough for this episode. No research done. But one of your co-hosts said something, and that was the last time this place was deep cleaned. And it's I don't want to say it's true, but I've been to Slim's and it has that feel
that's part of its charm.
Turn the lights up.
Yeah.
I don't turn the lights on. I really don't want to get a good look at where I'm standing.
Yeah.
So Daryl's Tavern, that's your kind of your
I like
go-to.
Daryl's. Yeah, I like Daryl's.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Daryl's has been there a few times. That's now when we talked on the phone, you guys might be expanding outside of the Seattle area with the show, possibly. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, that's correct. There's just some cool historic drinking establishments outside of the Seattle city limits. So we don't want to just limit ourselves just to Seattle. We'd like to go out, for example, there's a couple really cool ones in Everett. You and I talked about a couple places down in Tacoma. So yeah, I think we're going to definitely start doing that.
That would be, I also thought of another one in Tacoma, Magoo's Annex. Magoo's.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Magoo's is a long time dark dark, dank place.
Yeah.
with an interesting music history too.
Yep.
Now, I always ask my guests, now from Seattle, I'm kind of afraid what you're going to answer, but you drink coffee, right?
Correct.
You kind of live in the Edmonds area.
Mm-hmm.
Where's your go-to coffee spot?
There's a place in downtown Edmonds called Walnut Coffee on Walnut Avenue. And I like that. It just has a cool vibe to it. It's good. You always see people that and it's always a booth where I can sit down with my laptop. And so that's where I usually go.
So are you able to work? Can you concentrate in a coffee shop and work?
It depends what I'm doing. If I'm doing like some intense writing, I prefer to just kind of be by myself, isolated somewhere. But if I'm doing something light or maybe some research or something, I can do that in a coffee shop.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Any other coffee? So what's your beverage of choice? What's your coffee choice? What's your go-to coffee drink?
Oh, I just like drip coffee with maybe a little bit of cream, a little bit of sugar. I don't like to get too fancy. Fancy to me is maybe like a latte. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Don't say oat milk, please. Please, I beg you, don't say oat milk. Interesting places to grab a bite to eat in the Edmonds area.
Oh, man. Well, probably in the last couple years, Edmonds has really upped its food game, and there's actually some really exciting restaurants. So there's Fire and Iron is a good place. There's a Filipino and Hawaiian fusion place called Barcata that's really good. And then along Highway 99 in Edmonds area, there's all kinds of incredible Asian restaurants, everything from Korean fried chicken to ramen places to pho to Chinese restaurants from like very specific provinces. So I would say, in fact, they're starting to call it the International District. And I would say, the restaurants, the level of restaurants that you can find on Highway 99 in this area rivals those in the International District in downtown Seattle. There's some incredible places that are opening. Yeah.
Because 20 years ago, that's
right.
I lived up in the Lake Forest Park area. So, 20 years ago, 99 was not the best place in the world to grab food.
No, you might have a couple greasy spoons, but nothing like what there is now.
Is there in my memory serving correct? Is there a tavern called Harvey's?
Correct. Yeah, there is a tavern called Harvey's
with the neon sign that's kind of a rabbit.
I love that that sign. Yeah, it closed for a while and it just recently reopened, like maybe in the last couple months. I just was there as part of a newspaper article they did on the book, and so I was just inside there recently.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has it still got the same old?
Yeah.
Or have they freshened it up? Or
they freshened it up a little. I can't tell if they have a new owner or not, or what the story is there, but it pretty much looks the same as it did before. Yeah.
Okay. So when you're not writing, researching, and finding old things, what do you like to do? What else do you do for fun and excitement?
Gosh, I feel like that's all I've been doing the last 3 or 4 years is just writing. But I like to I like to work out my yard. I'm into gardening and stuff like that. So probably my spare time is usually spent out my yard or spending time with my family. I like movies. I'm a movie buff. I have been a movie buff for a long time. So if I can squeeze in a movie or two on a weekend, that's usually good for me. So that's for me.
All right. Last 2 questions.
Yeah.
What didn't I ask you that I should have?
Nothing that I can think of. I think you covered everything great. Yeah, I can't think of anything that you didn't cover.
Actually, there's three questions. Sorry, so you got 2 more to go. All right, this one's very important.
Okay.
I'm stealing this one from another Seattle area person.
Okay.
Tried it out. I actually kind of like it. Cake or pie, and why? And why?
I'm more of a cake person, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
As far as why, I don't know. I think I just like more the cake quality of it, if you will, rather than like a pie, like a fruit filling or something like that. So a good like chocolate cake to me is That's a good dessert.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's no wrong answer here.
Right.
There's no wrong answer. Okay.
Right.
So the last thing is, where can people find out more about you, about your books, your podcast? Where should we send them?
I have my own website, so it's bradholden.org. And from there, there's links to my podcast, links to my books. Or you can go to my Instagram page, which is Seattle Artifacts on Instagram. There's a lot of information about, different things I'm finding and stuff like that. And I also have my own Twitter account, which is under my name, Brad Holden. So any of those three places would be good.
All right. Well, Brad, thank you for taking the time. This has been a lot of fun for me.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a good convo.
And I'm looking forward to finish. So I'm halfway done with your 3 books. So I'm going to, I'll report back to you when I'm 100% completed.
Please do.
But so far, the Seattle Prohibition book was super strong so far. The Holden book is, I'm still not convinced you just didn't make it up. I'm just pretty sure you made up most everything, because it's bizarre story.
Yeah.
It's just,
it's incredible.
And then the Roadhouses will be interesting to see not that I'm an expert, because I'm not, but like, you'll mention places and I'll go, oh, I've been there. And what's my experience been like at some of these places? So I'm looking forward to filling that in, and I'll keep listening to the podcast. And thanks for being.
Thank you for having me on. It's been great.
Join us next time for another episode of the Exploring Washington State podcast.